I'm a PhD student at SVT, University of Bergen. I'm going to be talking about a case study on the future vision of a so-called smart electricity grid, and also the lack of deliberative practices as a quality issue. So this is another context where the word smart shows up as a keyword, as Alicia was talking about yesterday as well. So often, you have this smart ontology that you can sort of find in many domains in society, and energy is now one of them. So I'm very happy here to be here today to talk to an audience that actually don't find what I'm going to say to be very controversial, because usually that's not the case. So just very briefly, what are we talking about? Some of you already know what this is. In Italy, for example, was one of the first countries to roll out so-called smart meters. We're basically just talking about something that reads electricity automatically, so you don't have to, manually send in the electricity consumption that you have to your electricity company. It sends it in by itself. Yeah, and then there is a question of how frequent this should be measured. In Italy, for example, it's not so frequent. It's maybe once a month. This automatically is sent into your electricity company. And the issue is, the more frequent you have measurements, the more data, the more privacy issues, etc. One of the points here is to establish a demand response regime, which means that you get a price on electricity, for example, an hourly price, instead of an estimated price, right? And one of the goals is to reduce peak demand, which then means to have if we all use electricity not at the same time, but a bit at different times during the day, then we can spend less money on building energy infrastructures. So I have to be a bit quick. I know this is like a lot to take for someone who hasn't heard about it before, but I hope you're following. Yeah, so basically, in general, the advantages about this is very much emphasized. It's seen as a very necessary technological development. It's progress. You don't want to be stuck in the past. And the smarter, the better. So the more frequent measurements, the more data, the more information, the better it is. Some of the engineers that talked, they call the Italy, for example, here we have measurements every month. They call it turtle solutions. It is very much about being as smart as you can. I have to speed up. So I'm talking about a Norwegian context, but this is happening in different countries in Europe and, of course, locally. In Norway, we're installing this now within 2019. The background is a decade of discussions about so-called advanced electricity meters. And then it was continuously negative cost-benefit analysis, the last one in 2007, but they decided to introduce it anyway. And when you ask why, the answer you get is a decision was based on the belief in a future. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, what happened was that they stopped talking about this meter after 10 years, and they started talking about something like this, a smart grid. So you see this smart meter in the middle, which is then enabling all these other things that we can do once we have a smart meter. So you're sort of then enabling this desired future. So what are the goals and how do we get there? The basic mission is solve all the current challenges in the electricity grid. No less, basically. The solution is, well, we need more control for the energy sector, and we need more flexibility, which is then provided by consumers. How do we get there? Well, you have some tools. The first one is market mechanisms. The other one is to increase the automation and then get more control. So basically, more surveillance, more gathering of information data gives new market mechanisms financial incentives. When you have an hourly price and the price is high, maybe you'll make your dinner an hour later because that's cheaper. And then there's more automation and remote steering. So also external steering of elements in your home. So who decides? Whose vision is this? Who is producing this current vision? Well, basically, it reflects the current institutional structures. So In short, it's the very traditional energy experts. So it's the energy sector, the ministry, directorate, etc. What kind of expertise? Well, as expected, you find engineers, economists, some technology developers, and you have some scientists. But what kind of decisions are they making? Well, they're making value-based, and I will also say value-driven decisions in the face of risk and uncertainty. How do we meet climate change? How do we solve the problem of peak demand in energy? Well, we need some kind of vision, and this is a smart grid. So they're working towards realizing this vision of what they see as a desirable future. So in that sense, we can also say, as Alicia talked about yesterday, that in this case, both the true and the good have been kind of delegated to technoscience. So what do we hear about this in public? Well, as I said, the advantages for consumers are emphasized. And why is that? Well, according to the experts in energy, consumers won't understand the big picture. So this is how then the public is imagined by the experts. This is based on that they have very low interest in electricity and they have very limited understanding. They're non-experts. They mainly care about the cost for themselves as individuals, and therefore they might not think that the benefits for society as a whole is worth the cost for them as individuals. But there are some worries related to public opinion. Recently, we had some major protests in Norway in an area called Hardanger about some grid that was going to be built of energy infrastructure. So based on that, they're saying maybe the public will protest again. And they might be worried with good reason. These are some of the, in Norway we haven't rolled this out yet, but in other countries where this has been rolled out, the US, Australia, the UK, the Netherlands, and so on, there's been a lot of protests. And there's a lot of social movements who are also organized online in pages like stopsmartmeters.org, refusesmartmeters.com, etc. So these protests are related to issues like privacy, security, safety, costs, health. So then the obvious post-normal question is, who's missing in this process? So actually, my first point would be, where's the politicians? Because you see, it's just a technocracy. It's not even any political debate about this issue. Then you also have the data protection authorities. They're talking a little bit in the media about privacy issues. You have prosumers, people who are producing electricity with solar panels on their roof, for example. In Germany, you have a lot of them. Norway, we have almost no one, and they're not even part of the vision. What about local governments? People who are protesting, if we will have some protests. It is slowly beginning. It's very, very few. And there's social movements. And of course, we're all basically affected by this. Users, consumers, or the general public. We're all going to have a smart meter. So you see some dialogue going on the top. The energy sector, the politicians are a little bit involved, and then there's the data protection authorities, and you see some dialogue on the bottom. So the prosumers, maybe local governments, but there's very little going on across scales. So, of course, my suggestions is that we need an extended peer community here. So how can they contribute? Well, we don't really know, because we don't know until we ask them. But some suggestions would be, what about potential social, ethical, legal issues? Maybe they have some alternative energy visions that we could use to expand the current vision. Maybe they would emphasize other values. What about privacy issues? Should we be able to choose how smart we want our smart meter to be? What about the external steering of things in our homes? Should we be able to choose? What about security, hacking? Could we keep our dumb meter if we wanted to? What about the commodification of our behavior at home? 30 seconds, I'll wrap it up, yeah. So if I offer a service by changing how I act at home, and that's basically being paid for by the electricity company. What about class divisions then? What about financially vulnerable households? And environmental issues. So all these things are elements that are barely even talked about. So, of course, I would see that there is a lack of deliberative practices. This is an issue of quality. we need democratization of these energy policy decisions. And that even means including the political sphere here. So of course, broader participation processes, debating this vision, dialogue about knowledge and values, what is underpinning this vision. But since the traditional energy experts have basically had a monopoly on being the ones with the policy relevant knowledge. So my question would be, is this techno-scientific knowledge and the value systems beyond challenge? It presupposes that we have to be able to recognize all participants as legitimate stakeholders, mutual trust, maybe long-term commitment. In other cases, we have seen that other types of knowledge are being scientized by these experts. Significant institutional change will be necessary, and then maybe in order to get there, we would need some protests to initiate that kind of big change. So, maybe I'm not so very positive. I guess I'm thinking it's a very long-term project to think about post-normal science in the energy sector. But, all we can do is to never give up. So, yeah, let's keep trying. That's my message today.